네, 조금의 그 엑스트라 머니를 내고 들어가야 되는 타겟 갤러리라고 하는 데를 들어가겠습니다. 티켓은 이것입니다.
Already they had these fanfares and they would have a competition. Trumpet players would play, and then one of them gets selected to herald the athletes as they're coming in. You know, and still today, you know, we always have at the beginning of the Olympics, we have this sort of brass fanfare and this kind of thing. So that's kind of exciting to think about that possibility. So we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna move kind of quickly, focusing on, you know, a particular narrative I want to develop, but certainly afterwards take some more time because every instrument here is a treasure. We have things like, for example, here the Lionel Hampton. Lionel Hampton was one of the, he and Milt Jackson were the two like most famous vibraphonists in jazz that basically introduced and you know the vibraphone in jazz, and so many records I remember as a child. You know, I would listen to Lionel Hampton, you know, all the time with my father, had it on the radio. So this is, you know, a personal instrument of his, and it was made actually specially made by the Deegan Company for him. So not only is it his instrument, but really a custom-made, absolutely top of the line. So there's a lot of things like that you can see here from all different cultures and centuries. So we're going to jump, kind of moving on to the next gallery here, or part of the gallery. Continue a little bit with this kind of interplay between guitars, flutes, violins. Okay, so these two, this violin and viola. Okay, these are actually among, you know, kind of a grouping of some of the oldest violins and violas, European violins and violas. Actually made by Andrea Amati. So the Amati family are given credit for what is the form and the shape and the basic construction of the modern violin. So this would have been before Antonio Stradivari's time, but Stradivari actually, you know, the rumor is he studied in the workshop of the grandson of Andrea Amati, so Nicolai Amati, I think he was. So these instruments are 16th century, so 1559. Antonio Stradivari is 18th century in that area. And so what's so amazing to me is you look at these instruments and you're like, this could be a violin, you know, a 20th century violin, you know? I mean, the wood, you know, has character of aging, but the form, the shape, the dimensions, it looks like a violin, right? There hasn't been any significant change in centuries. So something about the intersection of that time period of the development of classical music or European art music and the you know the composers and the performers and the luthiers of this push towards an instrument, you know, and it sort of perfecting an instrument that had the type of resonance, the type of responsiveness, flexibility to really sophisticated kind of repertoire, and could become a soloist instrument, you know, on the stage in front of orchestras, led to, you know, an instrument that hasn't changed much. Meanwhile, the guitar has changed, continues to change. The guitar constantly changing through its development, right? And I think, you know, part of that is, I mean, the violin is used in many different genres around the world, but the guitar, you know, has had this push and pull, you know, between so many different kind of, you know, obviously the aesthetic you're looking for in an electric guitarist or a blues guitarist is going to be quite different than a classical guitarist on the concert stage. And so the makers of guitars have served all these different musicians and different aesthetics and come up with a lot of different designs. So kind of a fascinating history, and I'm going to give you a little bit more of a history related to the guitar, and actually this instrument played an important part in the guitar. So this is an oud, right, from the Middle East. This particular oud is from a family, the Nahat family from Syria. They got started in the late 19th century, and still today their instruments are really coveted, you know, as just perfect kind of sculptural form, acoustically, you know, just amazing. And you know, you can see a little bit on the front of the instruments also some what they call the rosette, you know, right in the sound hole. And this is typical on a lot of ouds. Is the sound holes are very decorative. This is made from bone, and so they cut this bone in such fine detail. And the Nahat family, actually in the center, put like their initials. So in Arabic, you know, there's initials like from the family. It's kind of a signature part of their instruments. So you know, I found this as kind of an example of, you know, just really kind of a supreme and really elegant oud from this is from 1907. But what's interesting about the oud is the oud actually historically, as an instrument, goes back to about the 6th century. And I'm talking here about what is properly the oud, which was an Arab instrument that developed from an even earlier instrument from the Persian Empire. So the Persians had a type of bowl-back, short-neck lute with less strings, and that may have gone back, you know, maybe another 800 years, you know, or so, you know, before this lute, or maybe even more. But then, you know, the Arabs took that instrument, they modified, they put more strings on it, they, you know, created a new instrument to serve their music, right? Even though the oud goes back that far, the oldest remaining ouds are from the mid-19th century. We don't have, you know, ouds, you know, from the 7th or 8th century. They just don't exist in the world. But we should understand that history because the oud came into Europe. Okay, so you had the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, were for 700 years were areas that were controlled politically and culturally by Arabs, right? So you have these Arab caliphates, or, you know, a type of empire or cultural and religious political extension that went all the way through North Africa and up through all the Iberian Peninsula. Until, you know, eventually Spain became Spain when the Christians, you know, kicked out the Muslim Arabs and, you know, established this country, you know, in connection with Europe. But that's a long time, 700 years, right? And then, of course, you know, Morocco and other more, you know, Arab-centered countries in North Africa are very close to Spain. So this instrument entered, you know, early in that time period, you know, in the, you know, potentially 7th, 8th century into Europe, right? And it played an important part in a series of short neck lute instruments in Europe during the medieval period, or a variety of instruments. There's no direct connection exactly to the guitar, but certainly the guitar wouldn't exist today if it weren't for the oud having entered into Europe. And then you have the European lute in the 16th century, which was very much, looks a lot like this, but had, you know, sometimes up to, you know, 11, 12, 13 strings or so, and there's a lot of lute repertoire from Europe. So that's the oud. Yes, okay, go ahead.
The rosette.
The rosette.
Now the rosette.
Yeah.
It looks personal, like the design.
Yeah.
Does it affect the sound?
Does it affect the sound? Not extensive. I mean, on a really minutia level, you could say yes, but the main part of the sound that you want to be concerned is one, okay, so you want the soundboard, the wood on the front, you want it to be, you know, vibrating freely. So you don't want a whole lot extra stuff aside from the bridge, because so the bridge where the strings are attached transfers the energy of the vibrating string to the wooden soundboard, right? So just like guitars have sound holes, you know, that's very useful for kind of projecting the sound, right? You know, one could argue on a very minutiae level, you know, does the bone there somehow inhibit some of the soundboard around the rosette from vibrating totally freely? Very, very kind of small level, if at all. So not something that, you know, has become a concern for players or instrument makers. So let's see. I want to show another instrument here. Yeah, so if you want to gather around on this side as well to get a little closer. So we were talking about guitars from the Renaissance and Baroque period. And so this little guy here is another Baroque guitar, right? But it's, you know, it's really small and slender. It has 10 strings. This is from 1700. It's from a part of Spain. And there's only two, well, actually, yeah, I believe, I was going to say there's only one or two. I think there's a museum in Paris that has one other remaining like this. And then there's a couple fragments of some folk guitars, a little less refined, from a little bit earlier than this in a part of Spain. So very few examples, but this instrument type was huge in influence in Latin America. If you spend time, if you go upstairs to Latin America, you're going to see instruments like the Mexican jarana used in son jarocho, you know, the song La Bamba, for example. You're going to see in the Andes in Peru and Bolivia these charangos, and they have these armadillo shell backs. You're going to see other instruments called the cuatro, and a variety all through Latin America of these small sort of folk guitars, right? And several of them are shaped kind of like that, long neck, slender. Others, you know, a little more round, but they all have these double courses of string, have these double strings, and most often it's like 10 strings for 5 courses, right? All of that comes from this small family of Baroque guitars. There was a whole family in Spain of different sizes, from small, and it was quite popular for a while, and then in the 19th century it became obsolete. Like I said, the six-string guitar kind of took over. But in Latin America,
This
Latin
prostate
America,
is not
not only in
right
Spain,
way
but
to
indigenous
put.
communities, mestizos,
This prostate
race,
must be there.
when they started to experiment with it,
This way is very dangerous.
and today, some of the most iconic
It's not.
string
It must be
instruments in Latin America
90
are
degree
descendants
with
of
this
kind of thing.
top and this
So,
stick.
stuff that people don't know
Must be
about
90
because,
degree.
you know, in the United States and Europe, this
It's
is
not
Very
90
dangerous.
You know, is disappeared.
It's not 90 degrees.
Here is musical
So, let's see,
instrument
moving on
museum,
here.
but wrong way to
We
put.
are going to
Especially.
jump to another string instrument. So this beauty here, okay, this is
I'm a
from
piano
Turkey.
technician.
It's in the 18th century, early to mid 18th century, and it is
That's
one of
funny.
the 2 earliest.
Especially considering the
Ottoman
piano.
tambur. So the Ottoman tambur is an instrument in Ottoman armies. The
Yeah,
Ottoman
it was a wild
Empire
thunder.
was quite influential.
The painter armies.
You know, Vienna had
Pop.
some time in
What do you fix
parallel
when
with the
you just-
Persian Empire,
like
but as
It's
the Persian
not-
Empire
it's-
was
it's
sort of
the
you know,
issues that
reducing,
problem.
Ottoman Empire was growing,
Should we bring
so the
that up?
Ottomans, you know,
Maybe
controlled
you
like,
should
North
talk.
Africa as well. So, for example, in a country like Egypt,
Maybe.
you know, you have ancient Egypt, right?
Oh, I
But
didn't
then
see
you
that.
have, you know,
See the piano
the
right there.
Arab caliphites, you know, that I mentioned that were in control of Egypt. Then you had the Ottomans, you know, you had the Persians, you had the Ottomans. So just a series of centuries of all these different empires until finally in the 20th century, Egypt became its own independent country, right? So I mentioned the Ottomans, I mentioned this instrument because not only because it's just absolutely gorgeous, and obviously it must have been like a court instrument in the Ottoman Empire, but this is one of the earliest examples of an instrument that was created from modifying a Persian instrument. So the Ottomans originally played all these Persian string instruments.
You go straight to
and,
train, you know?
You know, we grew from the Persian sort of musical systems and the repertoire, but then they wanted to establish our own, you know, Ottoman court music, and this was happening, you know, at the end of the 17th century, early century, and the formation of the tambur by changing the Persian instrument that was kind of similar was part of establishing this identity. These are the instruments are part of who we are, right? You know, and so this is a phenomenon of music.
에라르드에서 만들었네요.
Somebody from Bolivia would be like the charango, you know, that instrument I was talking about, you know, armadillo back, you know, this is like, you know, part of who we are, and so that's been happening kind of throughout all humans. So it's, you know, it's played, you know, seated, kind of with a guitar. The neck, you know, you would kind of have the neck like a little more angled up so that you can move against this really long neck, you know. So it's, yeah, and there's a lot of frets on here. You see these sort of gut frets that, you know, dividing the neck. And that relates, I mean, if you kind of into musical scales, musical systems, so they have in both Turkish music and Arabic music, there's these microtones. They're kind of like, let's say you go to the piano, right? So on the piano you have your white and black keys, and basically they call an octave, you divide up into these 12 semitones, okay? So the microtones are like cutting it even further, like quarter tones or nothing, or like in between the two keys on a piano.
김치지.
And but you know, musically, both the vocalist and instrumentalist, they can hear this, you know, with such precision that us Westerners, you know, we'd be like, it sounds kind of out of tune, like I can't quite hear it because it falls in between the notes we're used to. Yes, so I know I'm